Welcome to Inside the Game, episode 2, presented across the One Soccer social channels, our YouTube channel as well, and welcome to those watching on CanadaSoccer.com. I am Gareth Wheeler, and we have another big show for you tonight, coming off of last week's, which was great, with Canadian soccer legend Craig Forrest, and a big show and a big night for you as well. So sit right in for the next 3 hours. I guarantee you'll be entertained. First, we've got another great guest, very generous to share his time with us here tonight. And the premise of the show, if you haven't joined us before, it's very simple. It's a conversation, in depth and personal, name with, of course, a keen focus on what's going on in this great country of ours. So after tonight's guest, in an hour's time, we're going to spin it back to October 15th of 2019, the good old days, and at BMO Field for your enjoyment, Canada against the US men's national team all over again in Nations League action. It was a night that will not soon be forgotten and a banner night for our Canadian men. It's going to be the first time that I've actually watched back this game, so I'm looking coming your way at 8 p.m. tonight. To those that watched last week, thank you. For all who are new, welcome to the show. Our programming is quite robust here now on One Soccer. Our isolation coverage, basically nonstop, with, of course, the hangouts, the chats on weekday afternoons at 1 p.m. and the happy hour with Andy Petrillo, Carm, and Laura on Wednesday nights as well. If you have any questions tonight, at Wheeler TSN is where you find me on Twitter or on the side of our YouTube. Remember to subscribe as well. You can get involved in the chat and send your questions away. So let's get straight to it. Tonight's guest, well, when I was thinking about the concept of what this show would be about, he was right top the list. Charismatic, engaging, passionate, and committed to Canadian soccer through and through, the present as well as the future. And he has a story to tell, how he got here, the road successfully traveled, and how it's now come to help shape Canadian soccer. It's back-to-back Olympic bronze medalist, Pan Am Games gold medal winner, Jack Donahue Canadian Coach of the Year winner, and the first individual to coach both the men's and women's national teams. It's Mr. John Herdman. How are you tonight, John? How are you?
I'm good. And I'm loving you, Gareth. We
Thanks,
all
pal.
need a Gareth in our homes, keeping us light, bright, and clear through this this challenging period, sir.
Can you have a word with my wife after? Because I think she's had a little bit too much positivity.
I don't think you can have enough of it. I really don't. Like I say, you need to bottle up what you've got. I did a webinar the other day with a lot of Canadian coaches on, and we replayed that goal and yours and Terry's commentary of the second goal. It was just gold, absolute gold. Loved it.
It was probably a little bit different though, being on the field, jumping up and down with your staff and your players.
It's brilliant, man.
It was. We were just trying to capture the emotion of the night, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on as we kind of tee up what's coming up at the top of the clock. First off, how are you doing during this very difficult time, and what has been keeping you busy?
Well, I think it is a difficult time. I think some people have got it a lot worse than others, and I think our thoughts and prayers go out to those that are certainly not full of health. But I think in any sort of crisis, you come back to trying to control what you can control and looking for the opportunities in this period of time. So as an Excel leader of a program, I have a number of staff that are certainly in a period of uncertainty. And when the brain's uncertain, it tends to go towards emotionality, and that's where we're trying to keep our team away from. And like I say, just light, bright, clear. The future will be bright. There are things coming down the pipeline. It will take time. And for us, it's been, how can we be more ready when this thing comes back to light? And I don't know if you know how we're structured, but we're not the most well-resourced association in the world. We're definitely not the poorest either. So for 2 years, we've been heavily operational, and some of the things like the deep dive on our analytics and finishing elements of our National Excel curriculum. Those elements now, this is the breath of fresh air we've needed to be able to get our teeth into those areas. So, there are some real silver linings in this, Gareth.
Since you took over in January of 2018, the men's national program, it must be a whirlwind. And this allows you to kind of take advantage of some of these longer term projects. You mentioned 700 coaches in your Excel program, all on a webinar. What was that experience like with so many coaches using this method to connect?
Yeah, we've we've had a regional Excel strategy in place for the last 2 years. Joey Lombardi did a terrific job for a period of time, and now Eric Tenlado is on the ground. And typically, we go out to the provinces. We work with the coaches, and we work with directors of those regions, and then we identify the players. We do little trials and sessions with them. So we haven't been able to get out this next 2 to 3 months. We can't actually get to the provinces. So we've set up a series of online webinars to replace the topics that we would have been covering. Now, we've been doing this for 2 years. So what we know is when we come to these provinces, Gareth, not all coaches can turn up to our seminars on the evenings because they're coaching. So it was just a great opportunity. We took 3 modules and we condensed 6 hours of work into 90 minutes with a little bit of extra time. And we put it out there for people to engage. So we had, I think, over 1,000 people register, and then
Wow.
about 780 on the day. We had a couple of hundred from overseas that we had to shut off because we don't want our info going, and it was a good experience. Again, it's, we're trying to fill those voids on a Saturday afternoon that are left by coaching. So these are the silver linings. I'm hoping we manage to get more people motivated, and when Eric Tenlado launches these regional Excel webinars in the next 2 weeks, more people are aware of them.
Very good. While you're doing that, being productive, started building and creating the infrastructure for football in this country. I'm watching Sunderland Till I Die. Season 2. It just came out.
Watched it. I binged on it. I binged on it. I used to work there, so I know some of the faces that are still in the organization there. Cookie, the kit man, and yeah, he's been there forever. But yeah, it's what a series, eh?
I just love how it pulls back the curtain and really exposes the viewer to a lot of what club football is all about. And I think that sometimes people just wonder what it's actually like. And the depictions are real, they're authentic, and they really resonate with the viewer.
It's such a dynamic environment. I think when you do peel back the curtain, you start to see how dynamic the football world is, from the pressure from the scrutiny, but then just the ever-changing situation. You've seen it. They had a team with a top goal scorer, and just you have to be ready to adapt to all sorts of situations in this game. But the other one is the Brazil on Prime. If you get a chance to watch the Brazil documentary, I thought that was terrific as well. Just analyze. I put that one out to my players just to make sure that they can see the similarities and differences and look for opportunities in that documentary for us.
You mentioned Sunderland in Brazil. It's appropriate time to spin it back because I want to get into what made John Herdman the man, the leader, the coach he is today. And you grew up just west of Sunderland in a place called CANWNT. I was doing my research. You're the second most famous person that came out of that town. Who's number one?
Mr. Bean.
Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson as well. What I mean, in Sunderland Till I Die, it's made out to be a very working class, very hard place to live. Is that what you experienced growing up, John?
Absolutely. We grew up in a steel town, and through the 80s, it had, I don't know, 20,000 employees, all from the same town. Your grandfather, great grandfather, uncles, everyone worked there. And with the economic decline in the 80s, the steelworks closed down. I was probably 5, 6 years old at that time, and my grandfather was like the leader of the union, so there must have been some leadership elements in that. And But it was tough. I know your parents really struggled, and back in those days, your parents had kids young. I think my parents were like 18 when they had me and my sister. Um, and you come up the hard way. It's a rough part of the world as well. Like good people, warm people, but hard. And yeah, it's I would definitely say the work ethic, which is right at the core of what I would espouse as being part of my success would be just that working class work ethic, and then being sort of true to your roots as well, which is where you come from, and
Right.
you're never too far away from being back either.
Your mother's father, your grandfather, was a professional boxer at one time, wasn't he? I mean, you have the
Yeah,
fighting DNA, don't you?
there is
But
something.
in the ultra competitive world of the game of football in the UK, I mean, it's extremely competitive. You must have had to dig deep and use all of your fighting instincts to find your way and find your home within the soccer atmosphere or climate at that time.
Yeah, look, to any aspiring coaches, you're not going to get anywhere without that fight. My grandfather was a fighter, a professional boxer, 64 fights, and I'm from a fighting family. Glenn McCrory,
No.
he was a cruiserweight world champion. I get my looks. And a couple of street fights as well that didn't go too well, but that's where we were from. There's no middle class upbringing from where I was from. I know that for sure. So, like I say, it's you sort of come through this industry, which on the football side, getting my first jobs at Sunderland, I always remember Paul Bracewell, the ex-England captain, and he said to us, I was coaching his son in the Sunderland U12 team. I remember him saying, "Look, you're a good teacher of the game, you're a good coach." He says, "But you'll never have what I've had, which is standing in the middle of that field." And I remember this. I'm 20, probably 22 as a coach. I've picked up a lot of my licenses early. I was obsessed with the game, and it's always stuck with you. When someone says to you, "You can't, you won't," and you're on that journey just to get better every day, and just not necessarily prove people wrong, because that's not being the motivation, but it give you a sense of what you were fighting against and for. So, like I say, my time at Sunderland, the guys that were there for 3 years, you realize that it's difficult to progress up the ladder, because when there's a coaching change, there's a coaching staff comes in at the top jobs, and every 3-4 years. At that time, there was a change. Now it's every 1, 2, 6 months. So you could sense that maybe your future's not always going to be in the glitz of the Premier League academies. Maybe that's not the path. And funny enough, the government had just released a white paper under Tony Blair to say they wanted more professional players in coaching roles. And sort of I came more from an academic background. Not to say I didn't play. Christ, I played from the age of 5, and played Northern Premier youth, and played at university, played semi-professional in New Zealand. I've always played. It's just I've never been able to break those levels. And what you realized is that back then, I think before Mourinho and Wenger and coaches that came through without the Rafa Benitez big playing pedigrees, it was a real stigma for coaches to come through the system,
It,
which
it, it
made you work
makes,
harder, Gareth.
yeah, sure. It may still exist, that stigma, in a lot of perspectives, whether it's media, John, whether it's coaching, whether it's on an executive level. If you have a name behind you, it doesn't give you a golden ticket, but it certainly gives you opportunity. So when you went to Sunderland, which I find funny, by the way, because your boyhood team was Newcastle,
I know. But
the rival
disowned by
club.
my family, it wasn't a comfortable time, I'll tell you that.
But you're there, and some very good players came through that academy. Jordan Henderson, look at the season that he's had today, John. Like when you were there, were you on to something special was happening in terms of the development at the club? Like what did you learn at that time when you're at that club?
Yeah, I had Geordie in with the U12s. He was with us. He was playing up. an age group, and it's very clear. Like, these kids stand out a lot, but there are a lot of good players that didn't get through the system either. Like, I look at 3 players in and around Jordan, and you look at their quality compared to Jordan's, and you think, how did they not make it? How did they not? They were playing for England at U16, and again, it comes down to just those X factors. Like, the one thing with Jordan was just his obsession. Like, that kid was obsessed, man. He was almost like ADHD on football, and his dad was a big supporter in driving that kid forward. So, what I like about the academy in the Northeast, like, we had players like Martin Waghorn, who's at Derby, good player. Grant Ledbetter, who you've seen on that documentary, who's been around. Jack Colback, who's at Newcastle. These were all kids in that same 2-3 year era. Those kids, I think what you see from them, they're very single-minded at a young age. And I think coming from the Northeast, when you haven't got much, there's a level of adversity that these kids are experiencing. It's tough for the parents to even get them to training because they're working, some of them, 2 jobs. So I think there's definitely and maybe not so now, but there was a gold mine effect in the Northeast with, the talent that kept coming out, like the Peter Beardsleys, the Paul Gascoignes, the Chris Waddles. We've had a Michael Carrick's, a stream of players that have come out of this, what people at times would describe as a bit of a hotbed for football.
And the Northeast is distinct with a certain style of play as well. In the past, it was very much a direct game that they played, John, but you always took a liking or an interest in South American football. And you set up, you were part of an academy that developed talent in the South American way. Maybe you can describe what drew you to that and how that all came about.
Well, I think going into university, I became obsessed with the sort of science of football and getting a little bit disillusioned with the English way. I mean, we were certainly at a time where the English team hadn't qualified for the Euros in the 90s. We'd had a pool World Cup as well through the 90s. So, I think it was a period of time where I met a guy called Simon Clifford, who went and studied in Brazil for a period of time, almost conducted like an ethnography of just understanding the Brazilian way, the culture. And then he this little thing called a football de salão, a weighted ball. So I was at university at the time as he was launching this Brazilian soccer school in Leeds, and it literally took off. I mean, players Juninho, Emerson were at Middlesbrough at the time, and they were there, and so I got involved with that, and it just opened my mind to studying that Brazilian way. Simon took us on a deep journey where I really got a sense of what I've been taught as a kid in the English way. There's actually a better way here. And that actually opened my mind to start looking at the Dutch and the French, and, it sort of sparked my curiosity. I think, since that time, I've been to quite a few different countries and had a chance to see their methodologies, speak to technical directors about their methodologies, but not necessarily speak to them, go and see it in action, so I think that would spark that. And Simon, to be fair, I took on a franchise up in the Northeast, and we got music going, and it was best years of my life, to be honest. Like, if you wish you could go back and just have that time again, we were part of something pretty special because kids hadn't seen the type of things we were doing, the skills, and what happened is the pro footballers from Sunderland and Hartlepool United, and they started bringing their kids to my soccer school. And then the academy director at Sunderland got wind that 3 of the players had their kids there. And one of them said he wanted them to stay in this academy instead of come to the Sunderland. So the academy director came down, and he watched for about a week, and he said, "Look, I want you at my club." And that was it. I moved my franchise on. I sold it off to another guy, and that was my passion. I really wanted to be full time in football, like working at the highest level. At the time, I was a teacher, but I was part-time lecturing during the day, and then literally committed every night of the week and every day at the weekend to being at the club, coaching at 3 different age groups. And when I wasn't coaching, I was like doing my lectures in the morning, and then I was bunking off and watching, the first team, whatever I could see. Yeah, I was obsessed, to be honest, like really obsessed with the game.
You mentioned the skill aspect, how maybe the technique was a little bit different. You were offering a different approach. But the thing that interests me, especially about you, is this obsession with the footballing brain. In 2015, in an article from the Globe and Mail, you said, quote, if you don't understand the brain, you can't understand coaching. It starts and stops with this. And you have to understand how it works. Tactics, man management, how does it play a role in getting the most out of your team? The footballing brain, John.
Yeah, I'll start with the journey. I mean, obviously, coming through university, I covered football psychology. That was, an area I was really passionate about. Funny enough, I used the video clip of Peter Reid when they did the Fly on the Wall documentary, and he's in roasting his players. And I was covering a thesis on effective halftime communication. And we were pulling that apart. I mean, he's using F-bombs, C-bombs, everything's coming out. And so I mean, that it was stimulated at university. And, from that point, there was the Willie Rylaw work with Sven Eriksson. And Sven had I thought for me, he was a trendsetter in the game. He had that professor look with the glasses and not your stereotypical football coach. And again, just reading more and trying to understand his methodology, you could see that the X's and O's were not necessarily the most important thing. And it always started to play on my mind that at what point are we over focusing on the technical? Because it doesn't matter how technically gifted you are. The one thing that is always going to undermine performance is this. And it's consistent. It's a consistent factor. Like, why did Zidane headbutt a player in a World Cup final when his legacy's on the line? Like, why? Like, surely, come on. Like, he's done everything in his career but lift that World Cup at home or wherever he was doing it to cement his career. And you go and headbutt someone. And it doesn't matter how technically gifted you are. Like this, the mindset can always undermine skill set and whatever structures the coach can put in place. And more importantly, the structure you put in place and the skills you're asking players to contribute can undermine the mindset. So at the end of the day, we focus on X's, O's, technical. But for me, the real top performers, people like Christine Sinclair, will put a lot of work into the mind and building the thresholds to perform under pressure. In 2009, I got a real awakening to this. Like, I was always interested and thought I was good at this stuff. And I got the chance to work with a gentleman called Dr. Kerry Evans. And Kerry, if you followed his career, for me, he was the guy that triggered the change in the All Blacks and was able to help them go back-to-back performances. World Cups. He's worked with Mercedes, McLaren, worked with Arsenal, but he actually started the majority of his work with us, with the Football Ferns in New Zealand, and then helped Canada deliver the bronze medal in 2012. And I've got to say, if it wasn't for him, we weren't picking that medal up. Like, right. It is the work he'd done to enhance the threshold, to enable the players to get over that emotional impact of the US, and then to stay engaged into that next game, and then on task with under fatigue. A lot of that was him, behind the scenes, the work we'd put in place. So what I learned very quickly is, if you don't understand the mind, you don't really understand coaching, because the one thing it's always going to come down to, no matter how good your speech was, how good your tactics are, is the mind right for performance? So, come back to the simplicity. We are working on performing under great judgment, under great scrutiny, and that does things to humans. and no matter how you think you've got it under control, there's always going to be like a new situation in football you haven't experienced. So again, it's that concept of like, if you're really truly world class, then you're making sure that you've got that catered for, and that mental aspect, the work that people do behind the scenes, as well as the coach recognizing that I'm not front and center. Like the technical X's and O's aren't at the hub of the wheel. The tactics aren't at the hub of the wheel. Actually, it's the mindset and the mental. So that's it's been a big learning curve over the last 7 years. But from that, we've engaged sort of tactical creativity experts like Dr. Professor Mamert, um, Joan Vickers, quiet eye specialists. These are people who understand how the neuroscience behind decision making, the skill acquisition experts, Nicola Hodges, Ian Renshaw. These are people over the last 10 years I've had in my environment, plus Kerry Evans, to look at how we optimize 10-day windows as well as tournaments to ensure that, the mindset of the players are light, bright, and clear, and that we aren't, as coaches, messing it up for players, which we do quite a lot.
It's quite the extensive process in terms of developing a much more complete player or a much more complete individual, and decision making plays a lot into that. And obviously it's funny you're telling these stories and one path kind of leads into the other, but I'm just wondering what these doctors, what these professionals would have said back in 2001 when you said, you know what, I'm going to move to New Zealand. I'm going to pack up my life. I'm going to move over to New Zealand. I'm going to work in a country which isn't known for being football first. And what that experience, not only working as a technical director in New Zealand, John, but also as the women's national team head coach, taking the women to 2 World Cups, how that put you in a wonderful position to succeed coming here to Canada next.
Well, you know what? There was a fight in New Zealand for the legitimacy of your sport. I mean, I was dumped into the South, the deep South, like the deepest southern city, closest place to Antarctic, where rugby is king. And football, they used to have some chants.
In Lord of the Rings, it would be Middle Earth, right?
Middle Earth. We are deep, and this little hobbit is deep in Middle Earth, I'm telling you. But what was unique about New Zealand, like leaving for New Zealand, I had a lecturer I was going to go on a PhD pathway on learning experiences in football and all this stuff. And my lecturer actually one of my best friends moved to New Zealand. And he, said there's a regional director role coming up. If you come into this, you get out the academy structure, and we can do the structure, you can do your research. And basically you get a blank canvas as well, John, to implement your ideologies and thoughts. It'll be a hell of a learning experience. And that it was. So I'm thrust into this director role in the deep south of the South. And I'm coaching semi-pro. I've got a team in a 30,000 seater stadium where only 400 people ever turn up because it's a rugby stadium. I was given a good budget because there was loads of money in the South Island in New Zealand. So I'm importing ex-players from Newcastle's youth systems and ended up becoming player coach in the semi-pro team. So I had some unbelievable experiences there, just on, going from coach to being a player coach. And you're sort of 27-year-old at that stage, playing and coaching Southern Premier League in New Zealand. So that was my first taste of going from youth male to male football. And it was a hell of a fight. I mean, I remember getting threatened with a bottle off some guy, standing by the dugout, and welcome to sort of semi-pro football. But that was a great learning experience. You're doing that quite young, but at the same time, what I was always doing, Gareth, I was working on my craft, which was every night on the pitch, whether that was with the academy kids in Southland or with the Southland Spirit men's team. But at the same time, building systems and structures and researching. So I always had like this strategic element to us, that I was always wanting to put it down better. Like, can I build a system that's going to stay? Can I create something here? can I leave it better than I found it? And that was, my mentor in Southland who said, you'll only be judged on how well you've left something. And that judgment is typically 3 years, 2 years later. So, you've got that in your mind now. It's sort of etched in there that I've got to do something to put it down better. So that led us on a real strategic path. But I want you to picture, like in Southland where I was working, the sporting structure there is outstanding. The New Zealand sporting structure is like next level, like next level in terms of how they support sport in the country. And it's such a small population, you can get access to people you would never get access to in bigger countries. So I'm sitting in an office in Sports Southland. On the right side of us, I've got Lester Routledge, ex-All Black, the Italian rugby coach, just finished the job for Italy, coming back to coach the pro team here. So he sits there. On this side of us, I've got Pat Barwick, ex-New Zealand Olympic hockey coach, and coached in Germany as a national coach. And then over the way, you've got an Australian Ironman top competitor, understood periodization. So you had all of these coaches, and they had a great system of just having multiple coaches in one room working on their craft. So, you're learning by osmosis in these environments. And then in New Zealand, they would have every month these coaches gatherings where anyone that was sort of working at a talent level was invited to these workshops where you're getting access to All Black coaches, Silver Fern coaches, Black Stick coaches, like coaches in the Olympic programs and cycles. So in that period of time, like I stepped away from football, but I'm learning football from a distance, but I'm just learning about coaching, system builds from other codes. And this is where like I got a deeper understanding of analytics through like Australian rules football, and then through some of my connections with the All Blacks. For me, it was such a fertile ground because there was no real judgment. You didn't walk into a room like you would have back previously, and you're frightened to open your mouth because someone's going to go, well, you haven't played the game. What do you know? How many caps have you got? Like people just, let you get on. So like, I'll give you an example. When I moved on to Auckland and started to get into Olympic coaching, I was on a coach accelerator program, and the accelerator program pretty much started to expose you to all sorts of learning experiences. So they chose the 8 most up and coming talented coaches in the country. I was one of them at the time. And my mentor was one of the All Black assistant coaches, the Silver Ferns netball coach, Ruth Aiken, who just won world championships. And these are the people now I'm connecting with on a weekly basis. And then they have a high performance advisor. So this guy would come out to my coaching sessions. He would hide in the trees. So I've got national training sessions happening. And when I was with the women's team in New Zealand, we were coaching like 4 nights a week. It was like a residential almost. But he would hide in the trees with a video camera. The next morning I'd wake up and there'd be 4 clips questioning my coaching.
Wow.
The effectiveness, the communication, my behaviors, my body language. So it was, all I have to say is New Zealand was the most fertile learning experience, and for me, without that experience, there's no way I'd have been in Olympic, medal playoff games. There's just no way.
And it got you used to the paparazzi now, who comes and hide in the bushes to try to get pictures of you and the boys all the time, Johnny.
The 2015 World Cup, we had paparazzi. I've not seen it since.
We have about 25 minutes left. Let's get into your move to this country, your move to Canada. Clearly, you had a good thing going in New Zealand. What drew you over here to take the reins of our Canadian women's national team program?
So Canada came to New Zealand in my first game and beat us 4-0. Sinclair scored a hat-trick, and they turned up with their Adidas kit on. you know, we were there in, you know, maybe an oversized kit that we'd been handed down from the men's program.
Right.
We were playing at home, 5,000 people, North Harbour Stadium, and Sink scored a hat-trick in the first 30 minutes. So that was for me going, this is where I want to be in the future. I want to be with that team, because I'd sat down with Evan Pellerud, and, you know, again, I was just taking his knowledge. He gave us a bit of his time. I remember he killed us for being late to his meeting. And then he gave us some insights. And, you know, he was talking, they had residency programs, they were almost full time. And then he told us like half the population that played were female. And you go, and imagine that. Imagine working with that talent and then building systems in a country like that. So, you know, that was in the mind. I mean, I'd contacted Canada Soccer in 2008 when the job came up after Evan.
Yep.
And I had a good conversation with the people there. And then after Carolina, you know, I got the call from Peter Montopoli. We just finished the World Cup with New Zealand, and I've been with that program for 6 years. We got our first point at a World Cup, and I'd sense that you're at that time where I just brought all these young players that had the same coach now since 2005. It's now 2011, and we're going to go into another World Cup cycle. You know, you feel it when it could be time, and you know, getting that call from Peter, it was pretty clear that it's time. And the toughest thing was convincing my wife and two kids. I mean, my wife, New Zealand is such a beautiful place, man.
So's Vancouver, right?
Well,
So
that's what sold it. When we flew into Vancouver and she's seen the sea and the mountains, and you know, it was like home from home.
Obviously, you took over a program coming out of the 2011 World Cup where the team failed to impress, but you immediately had success with this team. Did you really truly understand how special of a group that you were taking over?
No, I didn't. Canada had played New Zealand a couple of times in the Cyprus Cup. We'd drawn with them, I think, twice, and then they beat us in the Cyprus Cup final by 1 goal, Matheson in the 85th minute. So we never really rated Canada. We felt that as a team, when we looked at all the resources they had, and New Zealand was able to compete with them every time we played. So what I looked at was like, how can a team that's so well resourced not be performing? There's huge potential here, surely. And they finished last place in the World Cup as well. So I think from that, you know, I wasn't sure what I was getting into. What I'd seen from the analysis I'd done, it was an aged team. And what I'd seen is that there'd been little trajectory of young players going into the senior environment, and that the youth system had been siloed. So basically different coaches running the youth programs, and there was no real cohesion. So I did all that analysis coming in to the program. So in my mind, it was, look, it's an aged team. 2015 will be tough. There's going to be a transition. But 2011, they're still ripe. This team, 2012, is still ripe. And there was a big call to clear the deck. You know, you're going to have to get rid of these players. The culture's poisonous and all this stuff. But I made a commitment that we'd stick together. We keep that team, because you knew, like, when people are broken, it's like one of the strongest positions you can be in if you get the right people around you to point you in the right direction. Like that rise up is something profound, and that's where that extra performance gear can come from. So, you know, looking at the team, when I first came in, I knew they were in a vulnerable situation, but a really precious opportunity. And at the same time, that average age and average caps, the team were ripe to do something.
There might have been a turning point or moments behind the scenes that others might not be privy to, but honestly, women's soccer in Canada was forever changed the day in the semifinal of the Olympic Games in 2012 when your side absolutely got jobbed in the match against the United States. And through that loss, John, like an incredible momentum built around that team, not only because they came home with a bronze medal, is just that was the galvanizing moment Did you feel it that through defeat that day that you'd come out in a better place?
Yeah, and I think that's if we'd won that game and then went on to win gold,
Right.
it just wouldn't sort of. It was the coming out like still to this day, and in no word of a lie, still to this day in an airport, someone's going to say, "Guy, you were robbed," and they still remember it. They remember where they were at, and I've been there. Like I've been in those moments in a country where you know where you were at when Paul Gascoigne got that second yellow card against Germany and cried. It's just moments like this in sport that connect countries in ways that they just can't be connected because everyone shares that feeling that the team have got, the coaches. Yeah, it changed everything for us. It really did put these players on the map. And it wasn't necessarily just the moment of being robbed. I think it was how immediately after. I
Right.
think like Sinclair coming out and saying what she said, what every Canadian was thinking. And it was almost un-Canadian to say it, but she said it how it was. And it was just well done, Christine. And, as a leader, she stood up there. And yeah, I mean, look, I still get emotional now because you in your life, these moments of what you've worked for to be part of, whether it's a win or a loss, just to have been there on that stage with greatness. And that was those players that was standing in front of us that day.
Can I mean, to me, it's just an incredible accomplishment that you picked up a bronze medal in back-to-back Olympic Games. In the first one in 2012, because the United States in the game before. Then in 2016, you're in Brazil. You're in the host nation after losing that semifinal match. Can you compare those two bronze medal wins? And is there one that you're more proud of?
Awesome. Awesome, man. Awesome experience. The first one was at home in England in Coventry. So it was like we'd had the experience of beating Team GB, like a 70,000 partisans, 50,000 partisan crowd. And we got that sense of what it feels like to play. Some of those players had talked about that and carried it through. But the Brazil one was like, it's a proper football crowd. And you felt like, you can go into some games internationally and it's just like the game's going on, but this was like a proper 70,000 yellow shirts and the chants that were going on. And look, it was a moment because what we'd achieved in 2011, 2012 was the back end of a generation. And how we operate, so aren't aware, we operate on quadrennial cycles. So our funding is through Own the Podium. Own the Podium is a government funder that gives around $2.5 million a year to teams that have got the potential to medal. So every time you go to an Olympics, it's a $10 million tournament because the legacy of your program is dependent on whether or not you get on that podium. So people had asked the question, if anyone had seen the quadrennial plan, 2015 was great to have a home tournament, but we were peaking for the $10 million investment to get us through the next 10 million and the next. So, people are saying, well, you weren't trying to win. Of course, we're trying to win that tournament. But the evolution of an aged team that were going to be 33 plus at a 2016 Olympics, we were trying to bring the generation of Fleming, Rose, Becky, Leon, Kadisha, Ashley, all of these kids that were coming from our Excel program in. We were bringing the caps and experiences up so that they were more ripe in 2016 than they would be in 2015. We couldn't rush that process. So, coming into 2016 and delivering the medal, the Mark Hato and Anne Merklinger, they said to us after the game, and these are the guys that run OTP and are part of that Olympic program for summer team sports, the leaders really. They said, look, you've just kicked off the Olympics. with that medal. And it was, the team sport medals started to flow after that. And that was a great feeling because it was first one, people go, oh, it was by chance. But the hardest thing to do in sport is to repeat and go back to back. And we did it by design. We carefully planned that out, the staff, the mental staff, the physical staff on the way. But you make a lot of your own luck with the precision in your planning.
And you mentioned it earlier, you can only be judged on how you left something, and you left the women's program in a better place than when you started, when you took over the men's program in this country in 2018. I mean, I could talk about the women's program all night. We only have about 15 minutes left, John. So I want to talk about you taking over the men's national team in 2018 and how important it was for you and the program to get off to a winning start. You won your first 6 matches as Canadian head coach of the Canadian men's national team. How important was it for you to set the tone with wins at that time for a program that really needed to get used to winning once again?
Yeah, look, it was critical. It was a period where you had to start to inculcate your cultural framework and then implement a tactical framework while figure out the personalities and then look at where your strengths and weaknesses are within that team. And then in those 7 games, it was like curse and opportunity. The opportunity was we had 7 games from the game against New Zealand to the friendly match against Trinidad and Tobago, where we won all the games, but they were against non-tier 1 opponents in that CONCACAF environment. We didn't play Honduras, USA, Costa Rica, and we couldn't play those teams because we were on a journey of picking up CONCACAF ranking points for X qualification. So we couldn't fit friendly games into the windows based on where the games were scheduled and whatever. So the greatest strength was you were able to win. You were able. It's the first game USVI. We had a pretty intense conversation with the captain about the goal that we were setting to break records. Every game we play, we're looking to break records and put a new level of performance, scrutiny, and pressure on the team. So whether it was the most amount of goals ever scored at home, the highest record of goals scored, these were the targets were getting set internally. And because I wouldn't say the pressure was off, because there was a lot of pressure going to St. Kitts and places like that. Because if you mess up, you weren't going to the Gold Cup, or you messed up and you were out of Nations League Group A. The reality was it gave to put some more attention on being really deliberate on our tactical identity or the cultural elements and the leadership that was starting to form. So by the time we get to the Gold Cup, and now you're hitting Mexico for the first time, and now you're hitting a Haiti who's in good form for the first time, now your team's really getting tested in a year. And I think that hurt us a bit, but to some degree it was helpful, because we had to learn through those experiences to then get us ready for a game at home against the USA. And if you look at it, it's only 4 games that we've had where we've been truly tested mentally and technically. And that's part of what normal teams would do as part of their scheduling. Like if I look at the USA, they haven't had to go through the Nations League qualifiers or the CONCACAF qualifiers, CONCACAF pathways. So they've played games against Chile, Mexico were playing Chile, they've played Ecuador, they've played Uruguay, Mexico as friendly matches. So they've tested themselves in those windows. And they're able to have a tier 1 test, and then they get a tier 2 test. And there's different learnings in that. So, for us, we got a great benefit in that first 7 games, learning certain styles against a deep block and another deep block and another deep. A team comes out like Haiti, and it's direct football, big diags, overloading your fullbacks. And yeah, it was a good lesson for the team. But
it's a learning process, isn't it? While you're trying to create that culture, and when you talk to the players, They talk about the habits. They talk about relationships within the team. I want to get to some of what you've learned about your group in a moment, but we've gone 50 minutes and I haven't mentioned the name Alphonso Davies yet or Jonathan David. And you mentioned with the women's program bringing in and bringing through younger players at the right time, ushering a new era. I just wonder when the first time you saw these two young players in Alphonso and Jonathan, what were your thoughts and how have they surprised you and just how good can they be, John?
Well, I had a chance to watch Fonzie live at the Whitecaps here in Vancouver, and you got a sense of where his real strengths were, and it's when there's a lot of space. His game at Bayern Munich, he's definitely more complete across the four moments of the game. I thought, in his early years, he was more of a two-moment player, the attack and transition, and you know he had some tendencies in defensive organization to work hard, but it wasn't a massive strength. But now he just looks so complete, and that's what the Bayern Munich experience. When you go into an environment where the ceiling is this high, and you've got the potential to grow and hit it, then he's got that potential to hit a high ceiling, and that's what was perfect. I thought the Whitecaps and the people that have been working with Alphonso did a terrific job with him, and how he progressed his career. So with Alphonso, what you've seen is we've actually got a truly world-class left back playing in the Bundesliga, probably the first tier one, top five leagues in the world, level one, top five teams in a top five league, category one player who starts every week in that team. He's probably the first in our history that's been a top five.
And John, people are now putting him in the top five of that position in the world.
And I'd argue that, Bayern Munich is the top five clubs in the world. So the players in those clubs are the best in their positions. So, with Alphonso, I think scope and more potential. It's so exciting. Like, you think he's only 19. If he can keep his feet on the ground, and if you look at his history, the adversity he's experienced as a kid, how humble he is, his family upbringing, that he's just got a solid group of people around him.
Do you stay up at night, John, thinking like, how can I get even more out of him? Or what can he actually become wearing the maple leaf?
Yeah, it keeps you up all the time. It's the hardest thing about managing this team is how you bring the best players on the pitch at the right time. It really is difficult. Like, do you put Fonzie in as a wide forward in this game? Do you strengthen the back line up in this game? Do you give him more space from a transitional position as fullback to attack? Is this going to be a more transitional game where we'll be deeper, so you'll have that transitional space to play as a winger? And then in your attacking structures, we're very adaptable. We build. So, is he better? How do we get ways to keep Alphonso in wider positions? And yeah, it keeps us up, because then you've got the dilemma of, well, where does Junior fit now? And where does Lucas fit? And where does Jonathan fit? And how now do you get Ozo, Arfield, Mark Anthony Kerr, Kyle Laren's banging the goals in, Atiba, Stefan Eustáquio. So that it's really difficult. I mean, what's obvious is that man is performing at that proper, truly tier one, level.
Is Jonathan far off from that level? Do you see him having the ability? Like, he's such an exciting player. Canadian Men's Footballer of the Year in 2019. I mean, what an introduction to the Canadian footballing audience, John.
Yeah, I think with Jonathan, I see a lot of similarities with Alphonso just in his upbringing. Like, they've come from really solid families where they've maybe had a little bit of adversity. They've had good coaches around them. I mean, Jonathan had a great youth coach in Ottawa who kept him grounded, and I think Alphonso had the same in his regional environment. So I think a lot of people have talent, a lot of talent. Like, Fonzie's got that athletic capacity. Daniil Henry says it better than anyone. Anything Fonzie sets his mind to, he can achieve because of his athletic ability. Like, you can put him in any position. If he wants to play there, you'll be the best at it because he's got so much quality. But what I think connects these two is just their foundation as people. Like
Uh,
they're solid, solid. So Johnny has a foundation where he can get there, and I think the next test is, we hear all the rumors, is can he do what Fonzie's done and move into that next level and be a Category 1 player?
we have 5 minutes left, John, and that's why the game that our viewers are about to see in 5 minutes' time, the replay of October 15th, 2019, that 2-0 win over the United States, it was something special. And you and I have had this conversation before. Alphonso Davies may be a household name today, but don't you need statement wins like that one against the United States to capture the imagination, to grab more eyes and ears, corporate sponsors, and bring them all to this wonderful sport and this wonderful program where we're going to be co-hosting the World Cup in 2026? Do we need more nights like that in order
Yeah,
to take that next step?
yeah. I mean, I've said it. We're being like rocking. We sort of rock forward and we rock back. We rock forward, we rock back. I mean, Gold Cup in the group, we're breaking records, goals scored, a double hat tricks, and then we come apart in the Haiti game where we were actually, quite comfortable. So you get to the US game and you raise the expectation again, and you go into the US and you're a goal down in 2 minutes. So yeah, we're aware, we're at that point where there are some elements we're very, very clear we've got to get right in our identity and the way we go about the game. But to your point as well, Gareth, you've got to learn through some of this. And it's difficult because, that you're learning on the job in critical games formats where there isn't that friendly match. Understand that, the back four that goes out against the US has got, Kamal Miller, first cap, Richie Larry, a second cap, Derek Keneally, a seventh cap, and 32-year-old Stephen Vittoria. There's some growing to do with this team. And, we haven't got the time to grow.
How patient are you, John?
We can't be patient now. This is it. You're in that stage where, these next games coming through are going to be World Cup qualification games, one way or the other. It's do or die. You've got to be in and ready to go. But I think the learnings from certainly Haiti and that second US game, if you want to dwell on the negatives, there's learnings there, but there's some real learnings from that game against the US. And I think internally we proved that we've got that in our locker. We can produce that level of performance. When you look at the second, it wasn't too far away actually from the first game. I think the US had 9 shots on target. We had 7. They scored 4 goals. I mean, that's international football. But how those 4 goals were scored, 2 set pieces and 2 transitional moments where we're too open in our attacking play. These are the little differences we've got to, tighten up when we're in camp, when we look at our tactical blueprints.
John, we just have a minute left, but in that US game, did you have a feeling that your team had something in the locker that night, something special to offer? And maybe your memory of that night, something that sticks with you more than the rest?
Yeah, I think the conversations the night before with 2 key players that, in their minds probably thought they would have played or should have played. They were awesome. They were always going to be, and they came in and executed it, on task in the rhythm of that game. And Gareth, what we did in that camp was a real shift on the will and the desire, and with that about breaking some personal records. So I'll be clear with you. Every man on that pitch outside of the defenders, because they didn't have to work as hard as they'd anticipated, broke all of their physical records. They went into the 12Ks, some of them.
Amazing.
They made a commitment to press for 90 minutes. And some of the players said, we can't press for 90 minutes. Well, if you can't and you can only press for 30, that's probably all you'll play. So there was a real strong will. There was a will that we're going to impose ourselves on this team. And then there was the will that we're actually going to do it. And they did.
I cannot wait to sit down and just watch this right now. It's going to be my first time I've rewatched the game back. I'm thoroughly looking forward to it. John, this has been an awesome experience. Thank you so much for doing this. You and I have known one another for years. We've chatted, we've engaged, but never like this. And I've learned a lot about you tonight. John Herdman, the man. It's great.
Thank you. Positivity. Now I'm going to go and bring that to the kids upstairs who were shooting Nerf guns around. So.
Well, nothing hit you during this broadcast. John, the best to you and your family. Please be in good health. And we can't wait to see you and the Canadian men's national team back on the field in the not so distant future, okay?
Thank you, Gareth. All the best, man.
John Herdman, the head coach of the Canadian men's national team. Episode 2 of Inside the Game is in the books. Coming up this Thursday, Alexei Lawless is going to join the program, and Jack Collison, a former Premier League footballer, next Tuesday as well. I want to thank David, Armin, Kurt, Canada Soccer, including Richard Scott as well, and of course, John Herdman. On behalf of everyone here at One Soccer, I am Gareth Wheeler. Canada, US is coming up next. Enjoy the rest of your night, Canada.